Okay, we're continuing in Halachos base, and I had hoped that the beginning of what I'm going to tell you today I had a more firm and complete, helpful answer for you, but unfortunately I don't. So hopefully you'll be able to help me in figuring this out, because I don't get to the question. I'm just setting you up that something we need to understand. The last time we spoke a lot about mechanically drying bugs. Okay, and we had said was that the din is that if a bug is 12 months old, it dries out so much that it becomes mutter. And there was a shiloh in the Poskim about whether if you mechanically dry it, meaning you stick it into an oven and leave it there for an hour, and that gets it just as dry, is that mutter also? And we talked about it, and the accepted practice is that in fact it is mutter, and that if it's mechanically dried, it's just as mutter as if it was dried for 12 months. And the example where this is mostly geared to is the example of herbs. Okay, that most of us in our pantries have dried herbs, and even if those herbs are not 12 months old, we want to say that they're mutter because they've been dried out to the point that any bugs that are in there, they don't do anything to get rid of the bugs. So any bugs that are in there are dried out also, and therefore they're mutter. Okay. Now I left off by telling you that I somewhat misled you about that information, and that's what we're going to talk about at the beginning of today, is to talk about that which is as follows. The impression that most people have is that, and that's in fact what, if you would go to a factory in the United States, that's what you would see wherever you went, is that when you want to take herbs, you want to take parsley, and you want to make dried parsley out of it, you put it onto some trays, stick it into a hot chamber, and you dry it out. Sort of what the Halachos was talking about. Okay. But the truth is that that's not what goes on all over the world. Okay, there are lots of places where herbs are not dried mechanically at all. Okay, they're dried in the sun. The guys lay them out outside and come back a few days later and it's ready to go. So I'm going to give you a little information that I have about that. The main person who I was hoping would help me on this information is sort of out of commission for a couple of weeks. But I have a fair amount of information. It is, let me start like this. There's a big spice company, McCormick. You've all heard of them. Okay, one of the McCormick buyers keeps a travel log of all the places he goes to, and it's an interesting thing to read. Okay, it's very interesting. And he goes on his different trips, and he keeps a log on their website of things that he does. Okay, so I found within those logs that when he went to check on basil grown in Egypt, he says after they harvested, the basil is placed carefully in baskets and sun-dried to keep its bright green color. Okay, and when he went to see sage in Albania, he also said that the sages, they bring back 100-pound bags every day, and they lay them out in their houses to dry. And they just lay them out in the sun to dry. There's the Kansas State University has a guide, more than 100 pages long, of how to grow your own herbs, how to do your own little farming, and they tell you, they seem to encourage drying in the sun. I'm not saying that you have to do that, but they say when you dry something, when you dry herbs, the temperature should be, for sure, never over 120 degrees, and the best is to go from 80 degrees to 105 degrees. Okay, that doesn't sound like what my impression from the Halachos was that you stuck it into your oven. When the two of us once saw someone drying, what was it? Paprika. Peppers make paprika. That wasn't in 100 degrees. That stuff was nice and hot. That's what the Halachos was talking about. These people are telling you dry between 80 and 105 degrees. Okay? I emailed Indian grower of herbs, and I said to him, tell me, in your country, how do you sun-dry it or do you, with heat? He said, oh, no, most of our herbs are sun-dried. That's how we do, mostly it's sun-dried. On the other hand, in the United States, I'm pretty sure that people who do that, it's not so much done in the United States, but the people who do that do it mechanically. I spoke to someone in Eretz Yisrael who visits a number of factories there. He told me wherever he visits, they dry it with heat. That's the same they do over there. And when I asked McCormick directly, I said, tell me, what do you do? The person didn't know very much. But the person said, well, it depends on the country and the place. Okay, so what you're hearing from me is, which is what I think is the truth, is that there may be places, and there may be even specific herbs that are dry taka mechanically, with a heat, that like we think like what the Halachos is describing, and therefore it's appropriate to say that those things are mutter because the bugs get dried out. The heat does the same job as drying out for 12 months, but But lots of other things are not being dried for 12 months. And they're not being dried with heat at all. Someone's laying them out in the sun, coming back 2 days later and taking them back. So what would be the reason to say that those should be mutter? Why do we take them? We don't say them mutter. We take them without hashkacha. We take them as is, no matter what they're kosher. Why should they be mutter? Yes, right now.
Do you think that the barometer of whether or not they're using an oven or not depends on the general state of the country? If it's more of a third world type place where labor's and everything is cheap like dirt, so then they put on something. They got plenty of workers to just go spreading it around.
Okay, maybe that is. So I'm willing to take any explanation, but the long and short is that if we're seeing that there are places that do it, either because of their climate or because of how much it costs to pay people, you can give me 100 explanations. If he tells us that basil coming from Egypt, they sun dry it. Okay, here's the buyer. So if I go now to the store and I buy McCormick basil, okay, that he just bought from Egypt, that was sun dried, why am I eating it? Why am I accepting it when I know that it wasn't dried with heat? I know it wasn't dried for 12 months. So why am I buying it? This thing, 6 weeks ago, this was grown in Egypt, okay, and now it's in my house. What happened between then and now till the bugs are in it? You guys didn't say that? You look like you guys didn't say. Okay. So I don't have a very good answer, and I really don't. And I know that. So I feel bad. Maybe we'll do once when someone gives me a good answer.
It's a sex factor.
What's a sex factor?
It's obviously there's bugs or not. There's bugs. Maybe it was right out.
Okay. I don't. Yeah, I'm not.
It's not a sex factor. It's a bundle.
Okay. So I'll tell you a little bit of what I can think of. I can't think of anything very exciting, I have to tell you. And that is like this. We mentioned last time that the shear of 12 months is what it takes to dry out a bug. Right? But there are other shiurim for drying things out. Some things take 2 months to dry out, something takes 30 days to dry it out. So in one of those cases, it's in Simon Tzadi, the Rambam says something takes 30 days to dry out. It's not important to us what the case is, okay? But it's a similar idea, which is it takes time to dry the thing out. The Rambam says it takes 30 days to dry it out. And the Shach says over there, it's in Simon Tzadi, the Shach is Yutzayin, the Shach says the 30 days is the standard rule. If you want to know how long it takes 30 days. That's the Rambam is giving you the standard rule. He says, but if you see that it dried out faster than that, that's okay. It's not halacha much misina that it's 30 days. 30 days is what the standard is that it takes. But if you can get it drier and faster, then that's fine. You could do it in less than that. So you could, if in 20 days you see that it's fully dried out, then that's fine. And in fact, a spice person who I spoke to says, from my perspective, that's from a spice perspective, whether they dried it in the sun or mechanically, I'm looking for moisture levels or whatever he looks for. He said, it's just as dry. That's the same trick. So maybe the answer is that all of us sitting in the room can't tell the difference, whether it's sun dried or mechanically dried, and even the spice buyer, from his perspective, however he measures it, it's just as dry. So we could say, even though it was not sun dried, dry for 12 months, even though it was not dried in an oven, but even so it has the same status as that, because it has the same effect.
Herbs still got in the bottle.
Very good. So that's the question. That's my next question is, let me just finish. I'm right up to that. You're always ahead of me. So, but the idea is that it gets so dried out that it's the equivalent. Okay? The question is, what David is saying is, what are you talking about? They're measuring the herbs. Someone's looking at the herbs and saying, is it this thing? And however their criteria of how it's if it's dried out enough. What does it do with the bug? They're not trying to measure the bugs are dried out enough. They're trying to measure the thing. So the best, I don't have a good answer. The best I'm going to say to you is, well, maybe the same way that the herbs got dried out and, a bunch of days in the sun in Egypt was the same as theirs, we can assume the bugs would also. I can't tell you I'm very excited by that answer. And a variation of that would be is that we could say is that the shear of 12 months is for all bugs. All bugs in 12 months get dried out to the point that they're kafir down on it. They're like nothing. Well, the kind of bugs that we're thinking about are not your average, grasshopper or I don't know, cockroach. We're talking about these tiny, tiny little thin nothing.
He is also.
So what?
Why would Mechaber have it talking about those tiny bugs also?
No, he is. So in fact, the Rambam says 30 days is the rule, and for us 12 months is the rule. Everything is gone in 12 months. But maybe when you have the super tiny ones like the Shach says, you can get it done faster. So maybe I'm not convinced at all of that.
The Shach said you can get
Shachs doesn't get done in 30 days?
No, the Rambam says 30 days. It takes it doesn't make a difference. To get mutter,
Bugs mutter?
it's not about bugs, but a different kind of yivush. It takes 30. I'm just saying that the Shach says these kind of rules of how long it takes, don't take them as they're written in stone. It's you're looking for a certain dryness.
30 days for that.
Because that's the standard.
Why didn't you use the standard by bugs?
No, because the Gemara says 12 months.
So it's obviously it's not just a number 12 months.
No, so there's
So maybe it goes for 10 months, 5 months, but not
so at 12 months, not 6 days. They're going to lay down sun for a couple of days. It's not like which is what you're trying to say is what I'm heading to, which listen to what's going on over here. Listen to what's going on over here. The Gemara said it takes 12 months. That means if you take a bug and you leave it in your pantry for 12 months, then you could eat it, so to speak. If it sits for 12 months. We went ahead and said, if you dry it in the oven, it's just as good. Dry it in the oven in 12 minutes, it's just as good. And now we went to another step and we said, hey, and if you stick it in the sun instead of in your pantry, then in 12 days it becomes mutter. So look where we went. We went from, the Gemara says it takes 12 months, and we decided that it's the same thing if you do this, and it's the same, that if you stick it out in the sun for an hour, for 12 hours. But it's we seem to have really stretched what the Gemara said. The Gemara said, do it for 12 months. That's what the Gemara said. And we turned that into 12 days. That's what we did. We said, stick it in the sun.
Yeah, because a temperature controlled in your house is not going to a furnace of 900 degrees.
Temperature control. What are you talking about?
It dries it out.
Temperature control. You think Ravina and Ravashi had air-conditioned houses and they lived in Antarctica? What do you think?
But it wasn't 900 degrees.
No, you're supposed to dry it in the sun. The guy said in Kansas City, he said between 80 and 105 degrees. Okay, that's my house in the summer. So what is it? 12, you think a bubble? It's air conditioned?
What's the difference if the sun is beating on it and not beating on it?
Okay,
I'll tell you that.
maybe. I have my final thought, unless you have something else to say, is at this point I have hopes that we will one day find the right answer to this. I'll find the person who knows the answer. So far I haven't.
Let me shoot just one little thing.
Sure, whatever you want to try, I'm working. Good.
What the Gemara is talking is that Alma, 12 months. You know, you open up the cabinet and you corner has some leftovers, some roaches. You know.
Okay.
All right. However, if it's going to be already like a yacht, so to speak, that you're actually putting out lahafis for the purpose of drying. That's different.
Okay.
Maybe what I was talking about.
I agree that could be. It just seems to me that it's a big stretch to say. It could be that, and that might be the answer, that you're doing an active yes, to try to do something to try to get it dried out. Okay, but I have to tell you, this is my closing not so happy thought, is that my fear is that what's going on over here is that the Rabbanim HaMachshir, the people who are behind the halachic policies for what we do, for hashkachas, what we do, looked at it and says, dried herbs, we dry herbs by sticking them in the oven, we pass them to Chacham Sadam, and it's mutter because they're dried out. And the subtlety that in Egypt they dry their sage this way, and in India they do it this way, maybe didn't filter its way down to the people making decisions. So, like Yossi said, we're trying to squeeze an answer into what they said, and lav dafka that those people would agree to that. In other words,
ask the Rav HaMachshir.
So I haven't gotten to everybody. I don't have. That's why I don't have a good answer. And we may knock on the right door, and the person says, the answer is partial. It's whatever. Okay, and maybe there's a good answer. I'm hoping that we're getting, but I'm fearful that just like to everybody here in this room, it was news that some of these things are sun-dried. Because it's not such a common thing where we would see it. If you go to a factory and ask somebody here, you wouldn't see that. It's in the more distant areas, which is where a lot of these herbs come from. That's where you find that. So hopefully we will come back one day and we'll have a good answer to all this. Yes?
Can I ask you a question? It's a little bit off the track, but has the same drying purposes. When it comes to gelatin and drying it out for 12 months, right? It says that the bones are dried out for 12 months. There's no more lach and no more of that. So why wouldn't that go in the same category as putting it through the oven and drying it out?
That was a question as to whether maybe the bones should be mutter.
Well, that's the difference that sees the bones, and therefore...
Thankfully, we're not talking about that. Yes.
That's what I was why do they make such kind? I just wanted to understand the whole...
Doing kosher gelatin was done here in America.
Okay.
Gelatin is not made from bones themselves.
Anymore. No, but the shiloh...
Gelatin is made from cartilage.
But it used to be made from bones. It can be made from bones. And that's the potential head is the one's made from bones.
It's not... It's kind of the
Marrow?
soft material
No, cartilage.
that
Holds
bones join, like at knuckles.
Okay.
Okay.
See, that's what the trade material is.
The ears of hogs are safe for what they call collagen. High stuff, great stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, we're really off topic. Let's get back to where we were.
These
But
bugs, bright bugs, are they?
It's not
That's
dry now.
berry or does not have to?
Not
That's
dry
what we
now.
got last
You
time.
cannot
That's
make
what-
anything dry.
It's like ground
Have a
spice.
comment?
Don't save it long enough.
Can you guys continue this after? Yes. No, that what we talked about last time. That's what we tried out. Yeah, that's mutter. That's what we talked about last time. That was the rise from this. Okay, now,
How would you check these herbs anyway?
how do you check them to see if there are bugs in them?
Like what ground basil? I don't know how do you.
If it's assuming there is a ground in
check
it,
these.
Dry dill.
I'm checking oregano.
I have to tell you, there are people who theorize that when they get dry and they ground like that, the bugs are so small they fall to the bottom and would never get into your package. In the packaging, the bigger pieces is what they keep, and the dust gets thrown out. I don't know what they do with the dust. Maybe they sell it to somebody, but the dust gets filtered out, and the bugs would be included in that dust, so to speak. And that's why you wouldn't see it if you looked in your package.
So like
And
frozen raspberry.
maybe it's true, and maybe it's not. There isn't anybody who
Verified.
knows that that's true. It's a theory that these little pieces fall to the bottom and will get filtered out.
How do you check that? Are these things mostly visible? How would you check for these things?
I mean, I haven't a clue how you would check that.
So then maybe that's why you can't.
So maybe.
You can check.
Okay, so now we have a new theory why it's filtered. Not because they're tried. Okay, so maybe there's another reason why it's filtered. That you're coming to save us and say it's filtered for a different reason. But the understood reason why it's filtered is not that. The understood reason is because they're dried out and the bugs get dry. The dry bugs are filtered.
But I don't understand though.
Okay, so
this whole conversation, whether you need to check or not check, it's not possible to check. I don't know what
So maybe we then have to ask the question then, since nobody ever focused on trying to check them, we have to think about it. But we have to see, can we figure out how to check them? We have to think about that. Okay, so
even if it's ground, then it's not buried spots on it.
it's true that sometimes ground is a suffix, and if it was only a mir hamatzuri, then you could say it's a suffix if it was there, and a suffix if it was ground up. Maybe that might be a reason to make it mutter, because we use our herbs ground. The dried ones, we don't have the whole. We have the
Some basil leaves are
basil, the leaves. Right. Okay. 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 Let's go on. Now to something a little more firm ground that we're being, which is we talked about last time about frozen, fresh, and dried was last time and some of this time. And the last that we have to talk about how you use herbs is freeze dried. Okay, that's the last way that you use herbs is freeze dried. So we were assuming that if you dry something out with heat, it's going to be mutter. And just to put it into perspective, if you dry it if you freeze an herb, it's not going to be mutter. And we said that was an example of for us, like a modern example of what the Mechaber said. The Mechaber was talking about if you put it into jelly, then that preserves it. So freezing it, we looked at it as a similar way and said freezing it also is going to preserve the bug, and even if it would be 12 months old, it wouldn't become mutter. Okay? So freeze drying is something in between those. Okay? And what it is that it's freeze drying is you remove the moisture. That's the idea, is to get the moisture out so it doesn't spoil, just like dry it mechanically. But instead of doing it with heat, instead of doing it with intense heat, to so to speak, boil the water out, to get the water out of it, you do it by the process of freeze drying is you freeze it. That's what you freeze it solid for 24 hours, and then you put it into a chamber that's under a tremendous vacuum, and under that tremendous vacuum, you put in a low amount of heat, and there's a process that's called sublimation. Okay, that's sublimation, where the liquid that's in the herb or in the food, it can be any food, the liquid that's in the food goes from being frozen, meaning from a solid state, to being a gas, that's into a vapor, without ever becoming a liquid in between. Okay? In other words, you're going from solid to gas without being liquid in between. Usually, you go from solid to liquid to gas. Like, think about a piece of ice. You put a piece of ice into a kettle, it'll have to turn to a liquid first and then turn into a gas. This, you go from ice to gas without ever passing through the liquid phase. And for whatever reason, that helps preserve the shape and the character and the color and the taste of the product much better than if you boil the water out. In a regular drying, you're, for whatever reason, passing through that liquid phase affects the food. It falls apart. It doesn't have the same color. It doesn't have the same taste to it. work as well. When you do this sublimation, somehow it makes it preserve it be much better. And you see, when you look at a freeze-dried thing, wait a second, it has much more of the original character it's supposed to. But it's a very, very sophisticated process. It takes Aruch 24 hours to do it. After it's frozen solid, it takes Aruch 24 hours in this chamber to do this process. So this is not a fly-by-night, some guy doing this in his backyard. If people who are doing freeze-drying, it's a very sophisticated process. People who have that equipment use it for all kinds of things. And the question is whether freeze-dried herbs would have the same heter as what we call heat-dried herbs. Okay, the freeze-dried. Now, the reason to think about it is because if the freeze-drying is so delicate and is so controlled that it preserves everything about the herb, well, maybe it also preserves the bug. Just like if you froze it. Okay, in other words, if you can keep the Machaber said, if you have a thing that's preserved, the fact that it's 12 months old doesn't make it mutter. So we have a thing here that became dry, but it was preserved. Maybe it should still be usher.
You said last week about the freezing that so even though it dries out, but when you leave it out, it gets moist again.
Okay.
So it doesn't happen with freeze-dried things.
Actually, it does. Actually, it does. It doesn't come moist by itself, but if you liquefy it, it turns back into.
If you liquefy anything.
No, it's not the same. If you take a freeze
They
dried.
took the worms out of the mushrooms and they soaked them in water and they became plump again.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? So anything that's dried out, you can.
Okay, I'm not sure about that. We're going to get to that in a second, I think. But so that's our question. Should we make the mutter? Go ahead.
I don't know what goes on in these chambers about the frozen. Maybe there's movement going on, like in different. It just sits.
It sits on a tray.
Doesn't move.
What it is you freeze it on the tray that's going to be used in the freeze dryer. It sits on the tray. And it goes into the chamber is so controlled that, let's say there's 10 trays stacked up. There's a heating bar in between each tray because you want heat to a very specific temperature in between. It's not just a warm chamber where something could be hot and cold.
Cold.
It's frozen. Frozen when it's freeze dried. It goes in frozen. Yeah. It's heated at a very, very specific temperature under a very strong vacuum, and it manages to boil out the water without it being a liquid, whatever that means.
Okay.
Just like back in lowest
like dry ice goes from.
Lowest is not, but still, why doesn't it become a liquid in between? So there's a triple point or triple something. Actually, all kinds of charts and explanations. It doesn't mean anything to me, but it's called sublimation, and it works. Okay? And it works. Okay, and it's very sophisticated. Okay, so anyhow, So
what happens to the bug?
So the question is, is it possible that just like the foods that come out of there retain all of their character, maybe the bug does also and should be mutter. Okay, so at two different times, did I say mutter? I meant usher. Should maybe usher. Okay, so at two different times, unrelated, maybe I learned from him, but Rabbi Gissinger and I both freeze-dried bugs. Okay, Rabbi Gissinger is the one, as I told you last time, wrote a long truth about this whole topic many years ago. It's mamish the very sort of classic tshuva about this thing. Everybody talks about his tshuva. And as part of his experiment, he freeze-dried bugs, and I did the same thing also. Okay, I did it. The reason why I did it was because when he wrote his tshuva originally, the OU's poskim were not happy and did not permit freeze-dried herbs. They said it would only be mutter if we knew there were no bugs in it. They did not automatically. He said they were mutter. The OU's poskim were not so happy about it. So we were recreating that to help them better understand it and see if that would help convince them. Okay, so what we did is, it's really easy to freeze dry herbs.
By yourself here?
Well, what it is that the companies I told this to you, I think yesterday, the companies that make herbs, when they bring them in from the fields, there's this wheel that they have. It looks like a tumbler for putting potato chips, for seasoned chips. They tumble all the herbs through them, and to get all the big pieces, to remove all dirt and remove bugs. And underneath that tumbler is a big box. It's a kupa shashratzim. That's what it is. It's 10,000 bugs crawling in this thing. The thing is amazingly amount of bugs in it. Okay, it's what Pari had for Keenum. That's what it is. A million bugs growing in this thing. And you can just scoop them out of there, and then you can put them in the freeze dryer. Okay, it's easy. Okay, lots of choices there of everything that you ever heard of is in there. Okay, they die first because or else they won't freeze. And then you freeze them and put them in the freeze dryer. So I didn't do it personally.
Freeze this living?
What'd you say?
What did you say?
Well, you have to freeze it. You can't put them into the freeze dryer.
Otherwise.
Well, first of all, they would crawl off the thing, but also because they have to be frozen solid.
How do you dye them? How do you kill them?
I think maybe put them into a bag first and we stuck them in the freezer. I don't remember all the gory details of how we managed to pull it up.
This is each one.
But yeah,
it might go in the category of let it be just for the record.
Okay, so what happened was And then we had a company do the freeze drying. One of the companies that does this stuff, they did us a favor and did freeze drying. Okay. So what happened was like this. Watching this experiment showed us two different reasons why they should be mutter.
Did you try freezing bugs? Just regular freezing bugs to compare? Or?
If I remember, these had to be frozen first. If I remember, if they were frozen...
Do you freeze them in the front? Just to see, to see what the difference is.
I don't remember, but I seem to remember that when they came out of the freezer, they were perfect. There was nothing different about them. They were completely as is. They went in and they came out again. The first thing is...
How do you tell the bug is not as is or not? What does that mean? Say bug is not as is.
You're going to hear. You'll hear when it doesn't look like that. Okay. When it came out of the freeze dryer, one thing is the bugs were completely gutted. Okay. There was no insides to the bugs. You looked at them. You looked at them. There was only like an outer shell of what had been the original bug, and there was no inside. You can see after the freeze dryer, the bugs were hollow. There was nothing inside of them. It was gone. There was nothing left of them. It was just like a shell. It was like if your car was missing the whole inside, you'd be able to tell. It was missing. There was nothing. It was just.
And they're not a berry anymore.
So one reason why is because when they came, no, these weren't microscope. These were beetles and
What happened to it?
bugs and
It dried out.
the freeze drying process, that stuff disappeared. It was gone. So hold a second. One reason to say that it's mutter is they're not becoming berries. Even let's say they become preserved, but if the process guts them out and makes them become not berries, then they're going to be mutter. Forget about because they're dry, they're mutter because they're berries. The second,
So there's multiple life in this place.
of course it is. How many bugs are there? You know what I mean? Okay. The second thing is that when you then
hold that shell of our, you can't check it to see
what?
Yeah,
if the bug is in there.
You can't find it. I told you yesterday. You can't find it. Right? You can't find them. You ever see it? Okay. And now next. The other thing was that when you took them out, okay, we took out these gutted. As soon as you touched them, they crumbled. Okay, they completely disintegrated. They were completely. There was nothing there. Okay, there was nothing left of them. Some of them also turned all kinds of colors. You could see that they were discolored from what they were supposed to be originally. Okay, so that is
So it treats bugs different than it would treat the actual.
What happens is that it's not doing to them. It's not preserving the bugs at all. They're disappearing. And in fact, the people at the freeze-drying companies had told us, we were just in conversation of, what do you freeze-dry? There's literally all kinds of things that they freeze-dry. But they've tried freeze-drying all kinds of other things and they were not successful. The one that sticks in my mind is, they tried to do lettuce. Okay? They tried to make lettuce, and try as they could, and you have to, there's lots of protein to make it work, they couldn't get it to freeze-dry. It would always collapse and fall apart and turn brittle like what we were seeing. Okay? That is to say, for whatever reason, maybe too much moisture, maybe when you take so much moisture, there's nothing left. I don't know exactly.
I bet you romaine they could do.
It doesn't hold up.
I bet your watermelon wouldn't work.
Okay, it's not, I don't know.
Go around the table.
It's not important to us to know, but what we did see was, it doesn't work for everything. Freeze drying, it works for cats, and it works for food, and a cat once got into freeze drying. I got into a freeze dryer. And it works for cats, and it works for food, and it works for ice cream. Yossi has a company that does ice cream. There are lots of fruits and vegetables. You know, a company that makes freezes ice cream?
Popo?
Oh, no, it's his company that does ice cream. His ice cream. You're just, okay, don't. Anyhow, so we got all kinds of things that it works for. It works for meat, but it doesn't work for certain things. And the bugs were ones that it did not work for. And based on this, after seeing this, the Wisconsin did change their minds, and they accepted Rabbi Kissinger and said that even though in certain foods it does preserve it and it retains its original structure, it's not what goes on for bugs. There was some questions as to whether every single bug would do that, but there was quite a variety of bugs over there, and they all had very similar reactions at the same time things happened. So before I close, just to remind you, I keep telling you how versatile the machinery is. So freeze-dried items need hashgacha just because of the kalim. Okay? That has nothing to do with the bugs of it. Because of the kalim, because the kalim really could be used for meat and fish and shrimp is a very common thing that's freeze-dried as shrimp.
But how high does it
What do you
get?
have to do with the kalim?
The kalim, that's not what we're talking about. We talked about once in a kashrus share.
Do you have another share in there?
No, we already had it. It already happened when we were talking them out. But it's not a game touch. But I'm just throwing in. Even though we're talking about that doesn't have a bug issue. Doesn't have a bug issue. That's what we're focusing on. It doesn't have a bug issue. You shouldn't walk away thinking. And therefore, it's not like dried herbs that for whatever reason we buy them without hashgacha because we assume they don't have kalim issues. They don't have kalim issues. These don't have bug issues. But they have children.
Now,